The restaurant at the Caldwell Grand Hotel closed at 11 o'clock, but the kitchen always ran past midnight. Sophia Harlow knew this better than anyone. She had memorized the sound of the last prep cook leaving, the exact moment the overhead lights clicked off in the back corridor, and the particular stillness that settled over the dining room once the final guest had been guided toward the elevator. She moved through that stillness like someone who belonged to it, wiping down the long mahogany bar with a cloth that had seen better days, humming something low and wordless that she would never have hummed if anyone were listening. Sophia was 24 years old and had been working at the Caldwell Grand for 2 years. She wore the standard uniform, a white blouse, black trousers, a small gold name pin that her manager Frank had told her to keep polished and visible at all times. She kept it polished. She kept everything in order because disorder was costly, and she could not afford costly things. She had grown up in a small town in eastern Ohio, the second of 3 daughters, in a house where the furnace broke every February, and her mother patched it with resourcefulness and prayer. Sophia had come to New York because her older sister had told her it was the kind of city that rewarded people willing to work hard. Sophia had believed her. She still believed her on most days. On the harder days, she believed in the overtime check instead. It was a Thursday in late October when the man came in. The restaurant had been half empty all evening, which was unusual for a Thursday. A conference in the hotel had cleared out early. A benefit dinner on the 32nd floor had drawn most of the regular guests upstairs, and Sophia had spent 4 hours carrying plates for a table of German businessmen who ordered exactly 1 bottle of wine and tipped like they were paying for a sandwich. She was tired in the specific, bone-deep way that comes not from physical exhaustion alone, but from the small accumulated indignities of being invisible, of serving people who look straight through you. She was about to refill the salt shakers when he walked in. He came through the side entrance, the one connecting to the private hotel lobby, not the street entrance most walk-in guests used. He wore a dark gray overcoat that fit him in a way that told Sophia immediately it had been made for his particular shoulders. No tie, no briefcase, no phone in his hand, which struck her as unusual, because every man who came through that entrance was either on a call or composing one. He was tall, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair cut short, and a jaw that looked like it had been set against something for a long time. He sat down at table 7 without waiting to be seated, which was technically against the policy Sophia was supposed to enforce, and he placed his hands flat on the white tablecloth and looked at nothing. Sophia walked over. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up. His eyes were a dark shade of hazel that in the low restaurant lighting looked almost entirely brown. There was something careful about the way he looked at her, not rude, not dismissive, but contained, like a man who had learned to measure his reactions before showing them. "Water," he said. "And the menu, please." She brought both. He ordered a steak, medium, and a glass of a burgundy she recommended, with the kind of quiet trust that surprised her. Most men at this hotel corrected her wine suggestions. He did not. He ate slowly and alone, and Sophia checked on him twice, without making it feel like surveillance, a skill she had developed over 2 years of reading the energy of solitary diners. Some wanted to be left entirely alone. Some wanted the comfort of occasional human contact, without the obligation of conversation. This man, she sensed, was somewhere between the two. It was after 11 when she brought the check. The kitchen had gone dark. Her colleague James had already clocked out, leaving her to close the section alone. The man, who had not offered his name and whose credit card she had not yet seen, was looking at the window beside his table, which faced the dark rectangle of the avenue below and the geometric lights of the buildings beyond it. "I'm sorry," Sophia said, setting the check folder on the table. "We're technically closed. I don't mean to rush you." "You're not rushing me," he said. He looked at the folder and then back at her. "Do you ever wonder what it looks like from up there?" Sophia paused. "I'm sorry." He nodded toward the window, toward the lights. "The city. When you're high enough up, every light looks like a decision someone made. You can see the grid, but you can't hear the noise." He stopped, as if he had said something he had not intended to say out loud. "Ignore that. Long day." Sophia looked at the window. She had looked at that same view hundreds of times and never thought of it that way. But now that he had said it, She could not unthink it. Every light a decision. She had made several dozen decisions today, and none of them had felt like they glittered. "It looks different from the street," she said. "From down there, it just looks like everyone else has somewhere to be." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down." Sophia blinked. "Excuse me." "You've been on your feet for at least 6 hours," he said, not unkindly. Not quite a command, though it had the shape of one. "The restaurant is closed. Sit down for a minute if you want." She should have said no. The policy was clear, and she had no reason to sit with a guest she did not know at a table she was supposed to be clearing. But something about the way he had said it, without any performance, without charm or manipulation, just a plain observation about a plain fact, made her pull out the chair across from him and sit. His name, she learned, was Bennett. He did not offer a last name, and she did not ask. He had been in the hotel for 3 days on business, he said, though he did not specify what business. He was not the kind of man who defined himself by profession. She got the sense that whatever he did, it was large and complicated, and he was tired of it, at least tonight. Sophia told him about Ohio. She was not sure why, except that he asked in a way that suggested he actually wanted to know, and that was rarer than it should have been. She told him about her mother and the particular smell of autumn mornings in a house with old wood floors, and something underneath that she had never quite been able to name. He listened without interrupting. The quality of his listening was different. He was not simply waiting for a gap to speak. He was actually inside what she was saying. They talked until nearly midnight, about the city and about silence, about what it meant to be good at something nobody valued, about choices, and about the things that look like choices, but are not really choices at all. At some point he poured the last of the burgundy into a second glass she had not asked for and had not refused, and they sat in the closed restaurant with the lights dimmed low and the avenue outside holding its breath, and Sophia felt something she had not felt in a long time, the specific sensation of being fully present in her own life. When she finally stood to close out his check, he looked at her with that same careful expression. Then he said quietly that he had not expected the evening to go like this. "Neither did I," she said honestly. She was not naive. She was not the kind of woman who confused a conversation for a promise. She understood exactly the distance between table 7 at the Caldwell Grand and whatever world this man inhabited between his rare visits to hotel restaurants after midnight. But she was also 24 and tired, and something in the night felt true in a way that did not require her to be cautious about it yet. What happened later happened the way things happen when two people have been honest with each other in the dark, and the city outside is very quiet, and neither of them wants the evening to end. It was one night. It was complete in itself. In the morning he was gone, and the only evidence he had been there at all was a $100 bill folded under the water glass and a single sentence written on the back of a cocktail napkin that she could not bring herself to throw away. It said, "Some lights are worth looking for." Sophia folded the napkin and put it in her apron pocket and went back to work. She did not know, standing in that dimmed restaurant with the smell of that evening still somehow in her memory, that the night had already begun to change everything. Sophia found out on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the night at Table 7, standing in the narrow bathroom of her apartment on West 148th Street, with a pregnancy test in her hand and the kind of silence around her that feels less like quiet and more like the world holding its breath before something shifts. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub. The tile was cold through her uniform trousers. She had come straight home from a morning shift and had not even taken off her shoes. The small pink plus sign on the test looked impossibly certain for something so small, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she had not known she was writing. She sat there for a long time. Sophia was not someone who fell apart easily. She had grown up in a house where falling apart was a luxury nobody could schedule, where you learned to absorb the next hard thing before the last one had fully settled, where strength was not something you celebrated, but something you simply practiced because the alternative was not practical. She had moved to New York alone at 22 with $400 and a sister's phone number, and she had built something out of that. Not a grand life, but a real one. A small apartment she kept clean, a job she was good at, a notebook full of observations that reminded her She was paying attention to the world, even when the world was not paying attention to her. But this was different. She did not have a phone number for Bennett. She did not have a last name. She had a cocktail napkin with 7 words on it, the memory of hazel eyes, and a man who had talked to her like she was worth talking to. That was all. The hotel registry was not available to staff. She had checked, quietly and carefully, 3 days after he left, telling herself she was inquiring about a forgotten item or a billing question, and the front desk manager had looked at her with a polite blankness that closed the door gently but firmly. She kept the pregnancy to herself. This was not a decision she made all at once. It was more like a series of smaller decisions, each one building on the last. She did not tell her mother because her mother would worry in a way that would require Sophia to manage the worry on top of everything else. She did not tell her coworker James because James was kind but could not keep a secret past Tuesday. She did not tell her sister because her sister would want to fix it. And some things cannot be fixed. They can only be lived through. She told the notebook. She wrote in it at night, small, honest entries about what she was feeling. Fear mostly. And underneath the fear a complicated tenderness she had not expected, as if her body had decided something her mind was still arguing about. The weeks passed. She adjusted her diet, the way she had read she should. She took vitamins from the drugstore on Broadway. She started her mornings 10 minutes earlier to account for the nausea that arrived reliably at 7 and left just as reliably by 8:30. She became an expert at managing her own invisible condition, carrying it quietly through 12-hour shifts, smiling at guests, refilling water glasses, keeping her name pin polished and visible at all times. She was 8 weeks along when her body stopped cooperating. It was a Friday afternoon, the beginning of the weekend rush, when Sophia felt the world tilt sideways in a way that had nothing to do with being tired. She was carrying a tray of water glasses toward a table near the window, the same window where Bennett had looked out at the lights and said they looked like decisions, and the room went soft at the edges in a way she recognized as wrong. She made it to the service station before her legs gave the first warning. She set the tray down with a sound that was too loud. James looked up from across the room. She did not remember sitting down. She remembered the floor looking very close, and then James's voice saying her name, and then nothing for a short while. She woke up in the ambulance, looking at a white ceiling and a paramedic who was explaining something about her blood pressure in a calm, practiced voice. "I'm fine," she told him. He looked at the tablet in his hands and told her she was dehydrated, that her vitals needed monitoring, and that given what she had disclosed to the first responder about her pregnancy, she needed to be seen by a physician. "I'm fine," Sophia said again, more quietly this time. "I know," the paramedic said, in a way that meant he had heard that before. St. Grace Medical Center on Riverside Drive was a 12-story building with a pale stone facade and a reputation for excellent emergency care. Sophia had passed it hundreds of times on the bus without ever expecting to be a patient there. They brought her in through the ambulance bay, settled her in a curtained bay in the emergency wing, hooked up a monitor, and drew blood with the efficient kindness of people who had done it thousands of times. A nurse named Gloria with steady hands asked her the standard questions and wrote down the answers without expression. Sophia answered honestly. Yes, pregnant. 8 weeks. No, she did not have an OB yet. No, nobody was coming. She was alone. Gloria wrote that down too, without expression, though something in her eyes softened, just slightly, as she did it. The bay was warm and the monitor beeped in a steady rhythm. Sophia stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate what the hospital bill was going to look like, and whether her insurance through the hotel would cover any of it, and whether she could pick up a Sunday double shift next week to offset whatever it did not. She was running numbers in her head when the curtain moved. The man who came through it was not the attending physician she had been told to expect. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a white coat with the practiced ease of someone who had worn one for decades. He had a kind face and the particular alertness of a doctor who actually looked at his patients rather than their charts first. He looked at Sophia, and then he looked at her again differently. Sophia Harlow. His voice was careful in a way that went slightly beyond the professional. Yes, she said. He pulled up a stool and sat down at her level, which she noticed because most doctors did not do that. He introduced himself as Dr. Theodore Wynn, senior attending in internal medicine, called in to consult given the pregnancy. He asked how she was feeling, about the nausea, the dizziness, how much water she had been drinking. He listened to her answers with the focused attention of someone assembling a picture. Then he said quietly, "I think we may have a mutual acquaintance." Sophia looked at him. "A man named Bennett Caldwell," Dr. Wynn said. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything. I'm only telling you because I believe you would want to know you're here, and I believe you deserve the choice of whether that happens." The name landed in the room with a weight the room was barely large enough to hold. Sophia said nothing for a moment. The monitor kept its rhythm. The fluorescent light above her hummed its single note. "How do you know that name?" she said finally. "Bennett is a close friend of mine. Has been for many years. He stayed at the Caldwell Grand 6 weeks ago." Dr. Wynn paused. He mentioned a conversation that stayed with him. He talked about a woman who worked in the restaurant. He said she saw the city differently than anyone he had met in a long time. Sophia looked at the ceiling. She felt something shift in her chest. Not relief exactly, and not hope exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both that she was not ready to name yet. "He doesn't know," she said. "I understand. I don't want him called out of obligation," she said, and her voice was steady when she said it even though nothing else in the room felt steady. "I don't want to be a situation somebody handles." Dr. Wynn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have known Bennett Caldwell for 19 years. I have watched him handle a great many situations. I have also watched him fail, repeatedly and stubbornly, to handle the things that actually mattered to him, because he was afraid of what caring about something would cost him." He looked at her directly. "This would matter to him. I am telling you that from 19 years of knowing him. What you choose to do with that information is entirely yours." Sophia closed her eyes. She thought about the cocktail napkin, still in the small ceramic bowl on her kitchen windowsill, where she had placed it the morning after the night at table 7. She thought about 7 words and what it meant to keep something you could have thrown away. She thought about her notebook and the entry she had written the night she found out, which said only, "I am not afraid of this. I am afraid of doing it wrong." "Call him," she said. Bennett Caldwell arrived at St. Grace Medical Center at 4:20 in the afternoon. He came in through the main entrance, wearing the same quality of dark overcoat Sophia remembered from October, and he walked through the lobby with the focused stride of a man who had been told something that rearranged the order of his priorities. Dr. Wynn met him at the elevator and said something low that Sophia could not hear from her bay. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see the hallway. She watched Bennett stop walking. She watched him stand still for a full 3 seconds, in the way a man of his particular self-containment would only stand still if something had moved him past the point where self-containment was useful. Then she watched him look down the hallway toward her curtain. He pulled it back and stood there. They looked at each other. The monitor beeped. The light hummed. "Sophia," he said. Just that. Her name in his voice. Quiet and a little unsteady at the edges. Not the controlled voice from the restaurant, but something underneath it. "Bennett," she said. He pulled up the same stool Dr. Wynn had used and sat down. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and she could see him working through something behind his eyes, sorting through the things he wanted to say to find the ones that were true rather than just useful. "Theodore told me," he said finally. "Are you all right? Are you both all right?" The word both stopped her. Not you, but both. She had not expected that word, and the unexpectedness of it did something to the armor she had been carefully maintaining since the ambulance. "We're all right," she said. "Dehydration. They're giving me fluids. I should have been better about drinking water." "Should have," he said, and it was not an accusation. It was an agreement, and underneath it was something that sounded almost like relief. "I should have left a number." "You didn't know," she said. "I knew that night was not nothing," he said. "I knew that when I left anyway because I was being careful, which is another word for being a coward about things that scare you." He looked at her hands on the hospital blanket. "I'm telling you that directly so you know where I stand." Sophia looked at him. She had spent 6 weeks constructing a version of this story in which she was entirely alone, Not because she wanted to be alone, but because alone was manageable and alone was something she knew how to be. She had built the architecture of her solitude carefully and efficiently, and she had told herself it was strength. Sitting here now, with this man who had driven across the city at 20 past and arrived with the word both already in his vocabulary, she was beginning to suspect that some of what she had called strength was actually just a very organized form of fear. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I'm not waiting to be asked," he said. The fluids dripped steadily through the four-line. Outside the curtain, the emergency wing carried on its ordinary, extraordinary business, voices and footsteps and the distant sound of a child crying and then stopping. Sophia looked at Bennett Caldwell and tried to read his face the way she had learned to read the faces of guests at the hotel, looking for the gap between what people showed and what they meant. She could not find the gap. That was either very good or very frightening. She was not yet sure which. But she was 8 weeks pregnant and alone in a hospital bay, and the father of her child had just told her he was not waiting to be asked. And somewhere on her kitchen windowsill, there was a cocktail napkin with 7 words on it that she had never thrown away. Some lights are worth looking for. Maybe this one was. The hospital discharged Sophia the following morning with a printed sheet of dietary guidelines, a referral to an obstetrician on the Upper West Side, and a small paper bag containing prenatal vitamins that Nurse Gloria pressed into her hands with the quiet warmth of someone who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can offer a person is a practical object and no commentary. Sophia thanked her. She meant it. Bennett was waiting in the lobby. She had not asked him to wait. She had not told him what time she would be discharged. She had assumed somewhere in the back of her mind that the clarity of the previous afternoon would soften overnight into the more comfortable territory of good intentions and careful distance, that he would call instead of appear, that there would be a reasonable, managed version of whatever this was going to be. He was sitting in one of the lobby chairs, with a paper coffee cup in each hand and his overcoat folded across his lap, and when he saw her come through the corridor, he stood up in the unhurried way of a man who had simply decided to be somewhere and was at peace with having decided it. He held out one of the cups. "Decaf," he said. "I checked." Sophia took it. It was warm against her palm. She looked at him for a moment, then at the cup, then said, "You stayed the whole night." "I slept in the chair for a few hours," he said. "The security guard and I have reached an understanding." Almost a smile. "Not quite, but almost. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said simply. And that was all he said about it. They walked out of St. Grace into a November morning that was cold and flat and silver, the kind of New York morning that strips everything back to its essential components. Bennett hailed a cab without being asked and held the door open, and Sophia got in because her legs were still slightly unsteady and the nearest subway entrance was 2 blocks away, and she was tired of performing a capability she did not currently have. In the cab, he did not fill the silence with plans or pronouncements. He asked if she was hungry. She said yes. They stopped at a diner on Amsterdam Avenue, where the coffee was strong and the booths were wide, and the lighting was the honest, unflattering kind that Sophia had always preferred to the soft amber glow of expensive restaurants. She ordered eggs and toast. He ordered the same. They sat across from each other, and Sophia thought about how strange it was that the second time she was sharing a meal with this man, it felt in some ways more real than the first. "Tell me something true," she said, because she was tired and the filter between her thoughts and her mouth had loosened overnight. He looked up from his coffee. "About what?" "About yourself," she said. "Something you would not tell someone you were trying to impress." He considered this seriously, which she appreciated. He did not deflect it with a joke or redirect it with a question back to her. He looked at his coffee cup for a moment and then said, "I built my first property development at 26 years old, and I have not stopped working since. I have missed funerals. I have missed birthdays. I have canceled things that mattered to people who mattered to me because I told myself the work was more important." He paused. "I think I believed it because work was something I could control and people were not." He looked at his cup. "I was engaged once, 7 years ago. She told me I was present in every room I walked into except the one she was in. I have thought about that sentence almost every day since." "What happened?" Sophia asked. "She left," he said. "She was right too. The eggs arrived. Sophia ate slowly, thinking about what he had said and what it had cost him to say it. She understood the specific exhaustion of being good at the version of yourself that the world rewards, while the quieter version goes unattended for so long it starts to feel like a stranger. I grew up watching my mother hold everything together with nothing, she said. She made it look so effortless that I spent years thinking strength meant not needing anything from anyone. I got very good at not needing things. She pulled a piece of toast apart. I am very, very good at it. I know, he said. You don't know me, she said, but there was no sharpness in it. Not yet, he said, but I am paying attention. The weeks that followed were not seamless. Sophia would not have trusted seamless. Seamless was what happened in the version of this story that got edited for comfort, where all the difficult parts were smoothed away and replaced with meaningful glances and perfect timing. Real things had friction. Real things had the Tuesday afternoon when Sophia called Bennett to tell him about the first OB appointment, and he did not answer because he was in a meeting that ran long, and she sat in the waiting room alone, feeling the particular sting of having allowed herself to expect something and been reminded why she did not usually do that. He called back 40 minutes later, slightly breathless, and the apology was genuine rather than performed, and she let it land instead of deflecting it, which was its own kind of progress. Real things had the evening. He showed up at her apartment unannounced with groceries because he had read something about iron levels in early pregnancy and decided to make pasta. She stood in her narrow kitchen watching a billionaire poorly chop an onion with the focused seriousness of a man attempting surgery, and she had to turn toward the window so he would not see her laughing. You're laughing, he said. I am not, she said. Your shoulders are doing it, he said. She turned around. She was laughing. He was smiling. The real smile, not the controlled version he offered the world, but the one that started in his eyes first and arrived at his mouth second. And the kitchen smelled like onion and olive oil, and it was the most ordinary moment she had experienced in months, and it felt inexplicably like something she wanted to keep. Real things had the Sunday afternoon when Bennett's younger brother Garrett, a sharp-suited man who wore his skepticism openly and without apology, came to the apartment under the guise of dropping off documents and spent 40 minutes asking Sophia questions that were politely phrased and professionally pointed. Where had she grown up? What were her plans? What did she understand about the complexity of Bennett's professional commitments? Sophia answered every question directly and without softening her edges. At the end of the 40 minutes, Garrett stood up and said to his brother, "She's not intimidated by you." And Bennett said, "I know." And something in the way he said it told Sophia that this was not, to him, a complication, but a relief. Real things had the night in Sophia's third month, when the fear came back with its full weight. Not the manageable background anxiety she had learned to carry, but the real thing, the 3 in the morning version that sits on your chest and lists every way something could go wrong. She was alone in her apartment. Bennett was in Chicago for 2 days on a project she had told him she was fine about. She lay in the dark and felt the smallness of her apartment and the largeness of what was coming, and she cried in the way she never usually cried, without managing it, just letting it happen. She texted him because she did not know why she texted him, but she did. She wrote only, "I am having a 3 in the morning night." Her phone rang 14 seconds later. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and slightly rough with sleep and completely awake in the way that mattered. She told him. All of it, the fear and the doubt and the specific terror of bringing a child into a life that was still so provisional, and the deeper fear underneath that one, the fear of wanting something from another person and having that want become a vulnerability. She talked for a long time, and he listened in that particular way he had, not waiting for her to finish, but actually inside what she was saying. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without immediately building a wall around it." "I'll try," she said honestly. "I have been afraid of this too," he said. "Every version of it, being needed, getting it wrong, becoming someone who is present in all the important rooms and still somehow absent where it counts. I have been afraid since the night in the hospital when Theodore called me, and the first word in my head was not panic, but something that felt dangerously like relief. Like something I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." He paused. I'm telling you this, so you know the fear is not one-sided. And I am telling you that I am choosing this anyway. Not because I have to, but because you are the most honest person I have been in a room with in a very long time, and I am not willing to be careful about this anymore. Sophia lay in the dark with the phone against her ear. Outside her window, the city made its permanent low sound, traffic and wind, and the particular hum of 10 million people existing simultaneously in close proximity, each carrying their own invisible weight through the November dark. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. "I am not building a wall around it," she said. He exhaled. The first time she had heard him exhale like that, like something had been held for a long time and could now be set down. The baby was due in June. As the months passed and Sophia's body changed and the appointments accumulated and the small practical architecture of a shared life began to be built piece by piece, things became clearer without becoming simple. Bennett found an apartment 3 blocks from Sophia's, close enough to be present, separate enough to respect the independence she had told him plainly she was not willing to surrender. She had said this on a Sunday morning over the coffee he still always brought in 2 cups, decaf for her. He had listened and said he understood, and then had gone and found the apartment on the same street that same afternoon, which was both slightly presumptuous and entirely consistent with who he was. She decided she could work with both of those things. She told her mother in January, over the phone, standing in her kitchen with the cocktail napkin still in its ceramic bowl on the windowsill. Her mother was quiet for a long moment and then said, in the steady Ohio voice that had patched furnaces and raised 3 daughters and absorbed more difficulty than it ever acknowledged, "Is he worth it, Sophia? Is this something you're choosing?" Sophia looked at the napkin. "Some lights are worth looking for." "I think so," she said. "I'm still deciding if I'm brave enough to let it in properly." "You've always been brave enough," her mother said. "You just keep forgetting." In April, at the routine ultrasound that Bennett attended with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, the technician moved the wand, and there on the gray and white screen was the clear, unmistakable image of a small profile, a forehead, a nose, 2 hands raised near a face, as if in greeting or in sleep. Sophia felt Bennett's hand close around hers. She had not reached for it. He had simply offered it, and she had simply let it stay. Neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. She turned her head and looked at him. His jaw was set the way it always was, and his eyes were fixed on the screen, and there was something in his face she recognized, because she had been learning to read him for months and had gotten good at it. It was the face of a man who had spent a long time being present in every room except the ones that mattered, and who had arrived at 38 in a room that mattered enormously and was choosing to stay in it with everything he had. She squeezed his hand. He looked at her, and she saw it then clearly, without any gap between what he showed and what he meant. The thing she had been cautious about naming. The thing her mother had asked about on the phone in January. It was not perfect. It was not seamless. It was built out of 2 people who had both gotten very good at managing alone, slowly and imperfectly learning to manage together, which was harder and more frightening and more worth it than either of them had expected. In June, on a warm Thursday morning, Sophia Harlow gave birth to a daughter. They named her Wren, because Sophia had read that wrens were the loudest birds relative to their size, filling up spaces far larger than themselves with sound, and because Bennett had looked up from the book of names and said that sounded like someone he would want to know, and because some names, like some nights, carry more inside them than their size suggests. Sophia lay in the hospital bed with Wren against her chest, the small and possible weight of a new life settling into the curve of her arm, and looked at Bennett, sitting beside her in the chair where he had been for 11 hours, without complaint. His overcoat was draped over the back of the chair. His hair was slightly undone. He was looking at Wren with an expression that had no performance in it whatsoever, only the raw, unguarded look of a man who had finally stopped being careful about something and found, on the other side of caution, everything he had been working toward without knowing it. "She has your nose," Sophia said. "She has your stubbornness," he said. "That will serve her well," Sophia said. "It already has," he said, and looked up at Sophia with the real smile, the one that started in his eyes, and she let it in properly, the way her mother had said she was always brave enough to do. Outside the hospital window, New York was doing what New York always did, moving and glittering and full of light. Every window a decision, every decision a life in progress. Sophia looked at it for a moment, and then looked back at the two people in the room with her, and thought that the city looked different from in here than it did from any street or any restaurant window she had ever looked through before. From in here, it looked unmistakably like home.